Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
Wednesday, and all of our guests today brought to you by our title sponsor, Able Auctions, ableauctions.ca. Canucks in Pittsburgh tonight as their 6-game road trip continues after the win in Boston yesterday. Joining us to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins, tough times for them, from The Athletic, Josh Yohe, semi-regular on the show.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this, sir. How are you?
Oh, my pleasure. Good. How are you?
Good, good. Better than the Penguins, last place in the Metropolitan, 29th overall, losers of 6 of 7. Who's getting the blame in Pittsburgh, Josh?
Oh, boy. A little bit of everybody. Fenway Sports Group's getting some blame. Kyle Dubas is getting some blame. Mike Sullivan's getting a lot of blame. I think the players should probably be getting a little more blame than they are. But it's a disaster right now. Fans never like to blame the players, of course. They like to blame everybody else. But it's just a bad roster, and a lot of people are underperforming. And as you will probably see tonight, they are the worst defensive team in the league by far. It's pretty painful to watch them these days.
You mentioned Mike Sullivan, of course, a Vancouver connection, a former assistant coach here under John Tortorella. Not that long ago, all sorts of success in Pittsburgh, of course. Not so much lately. What do you think is in his future, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think he's a great coach. I really do. A lot of people are wondering, is he on the hot seat? I've never been under the impression that he is. I know ownership and Dubas really love him. And the biggest thing of all is that Sidney Crosby has made it pretty clear in the last couple of years that he never wants to play for another coach. Sullivan's his guy. And he and Mike Sullivan are really close, very much aligned. That said, if the Penguins keep playing like this, and if they're going to end up being one of the worst teams in the league, I have to think Sullivan is probably in some kind of trouble. But I don't think he'll be fired during the season. I think it's unlikely. After this season, things get interesting. I can tell you for a fact the New Jersey Devils really wanted to hire him last summer, and he just basically told them he wasn't interested. His loyalty was to Crosby, and that's the way it was. But I don't know how much more of this Mike really will want to withstand, because this team might be really bad for at least a couple of years.
Josh, you mentioned Sidney Crosby. Is he going to stick around? I mean, he just signed for 3 years, and people are wondering, if they're going to be in a sort of a rebuild. Is there a possibility he might leave someday?
I mean, there's always a possibility. I can only go on what Sid has told me and what he's told other people, and that is that he very much wants to finish his career in Pittsburgh, that his two heroes in his hockey life are Mario Lemieux and Steve Yzerman, two guys who only played for one franchise, and that really means a lot to him. So I'll take Sid at his word, and I think it's unlikely he would ever go anywhere else. But that said, I'll say the same thing about Sid that I said about Sullivan. If it gets really bad for the next couple of years, and I can tell you, Sid looks depressed after every game right now. He's never played for a bad team. This is all new to him. So it's got to be incredibly frustrating, and I know people are going to ask questions. I mean, listen, especially in the Canadian markets, trust me, I know how it is. People are going to say, Sid knows Rick Tocchet and Jim Rutherford really well. He might be comfortable there, or Sid's best friends with Nathan McKinnon. He might like to play in Colorado. So, I mean, the rumors are going to come up, and I certainly understand it, but I can only base on what he said. And what he has said is he'd never really be interested, but you can see why he would be if things keep getting this bad.
Josh, whenever we try and figure out who the Canucks are going to go after, we always Google ties to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Any former Penguin is game here in Vancouver. Hey, Marcus Pettersson's name has popped up. The Canucks obviously have interest. What's happening there with Pettersson and a possible Vancouver connection there as well?
Sure. Well, listen, Jim Rutherford loves this guy. I know that for a fact. He acquired him when he was in Pittsburgh. Marcus is an unrestricted free agent after this season. He's going to be traded. The Penguins have very few guys who don't have no trade clauses. He's one of them. They are desperate for prospects or draft picks in any form. So I'd be stunned if Marcus isn't traded at some point before the deadline. I know Jim Rutherford loves him. Pettersson's not really having a good season, but I really attribute that to the fact that he's played with Erik Karlsson all year, and Karlsson is an absolute disaster. I can't believe how badly he's playing right now. Marcus is a good player. He's a reliable defensive defenseman with a long reach. Not going to give you a lot of offense, but he's a legitimate top 4 guy who is a very solid defensive player. He's also a wonderful guy in the locker room. Everybody loves Marcus. He's a really good human being. So I could certainly see Vancouver having interest in him. He's the kind of guy who's going to help a Stanley Cup contender. He's just a solid, dependable defenseman.
Josh, let's go back a couple of answers ago. You're saying that Sidney Crosby is coming to Vancouver? Have I got that right?
Rutherford loves him too, by the way.
Well, he sure does. Trust me, and so does Rick Tocchet, I assure you. If I'm Sid and I do want to be traded someday, that'd probably be my top choice. It'd be right up there. Because, and listen, I don't mean to start a bunch of rumors because I don't really think Sid wants to be traded. But I do know that he loves Tocchet and he loves Rutherford. And I know he likes Patrick Alvin, and there's a lot of other former Penguins on that roster. JT Miller's a Pittsburgh kid, so I know he has some kind of a relationship with him. So, yeah, it all makes sense. That'd be pretty cool to see. The hockey fan in me would love to see that. Oh, my gosh, I'm sure they would give him the key to the city when he showed up in British Columbia. But I still think it's unlikely to happen. Certainly not in the next year or so. He just signed a new deal, and he's a creature of habit. He's incredibly comfortable here, even though the team stinks.
7th round draft pick for Sidney Crosby. It's done, Josh. Done. Mark it down. Hey, Josh.
Take a little more than that.
Hey, Josh. What about the Penguins' lack of success and what it has meant for the building? What about attendance right now?
It's bad. Listen, the Penguins had a streak from, excluding the COVID times, from 2007 to 2022 for 15 years. They had a 15-year sellout streak, and that is not the case. So they've had a couple of sellouts this season, but the only game they sold out other than the opener was when Marc-Andre Fleury played his final game in Pittsburgh. Even the night Crosby scored his 600th goal and the night Malkin scored his 500th goal, both of which have happened in the last month, they've had a couple thousand empty seats. We are not used to seeing that in Pittsburgh, but I think people know this team stinks. I think people acknowledge this is kind of a boring team as well as a bad one. And, yeah, you got Crosby and Malkin, and you can never take that for granted, but they've been here for almost 20 years. I think people are just spoiled. And so it's a little bit of a concern for the Penguins these days, no question.
And a wonderful hockey town it is. Goals against, you can't win in this league, Josh, without goaltending, and I'm going to guess the goaltending hasn't been great.
No, it's been bad. You know what, though? It's really hard to gauge the goaltenders because I'm telling you, the defensive work in front of them is so pathetic. The Penguins lead the league by far in odd man rushes against. You just watch them play. The fundamental defensive habits are so bad. And Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang have been the biggest offenders. Karlsson's so out to lunch, it's unbelievable. And Letang looks like Father Time is finally starting to catch up to him at 37 a little bit. So the defensive work is bad. Tristan Jarry, a British Columbia native, he was sent to Wilkes-Barre for a couple of weeks in the American Hockey League just to kind of find his game. He's not been good. Here's an extraordinary stat. Jarry has started 6 games this season. He has allowed the first goal on the first shot in 4 of them. I've never seen anything like it. It's got to be some kind of a mental thing. First shot of the game keeps going in. He's been a mess. Alex Nedeljkovic hasn't been any better. There's goals against in general, just an enormous problem for the Penguins.
All right, Josh, we appreciate this. We're going to throw out that Sidney Crosby to Vancouver rumor, and if anybody criticizes us, we're going to blame you. Just blame so you know.
I assume that would be the case. I'd expect nothing less. But, if it does happen someday, I expect to be taken to your finest seafood restaurant in Vancouver when I return, and the tab's on you guys.
Yeah, but you look like a genius.
We'll give you credit.
Hard to do on this show. Hey, Josh, thanks for this. It's not the first time, and we appreciate it every time. Thank you.
No problem, guys. Take care.